Our next speaker, I would like to invite to the stage Dr. Jonathan Herzig, and he is a senior researcher scientist at Google, and he is going to take us into the world of LLM and hallucination. So, Professor, the stage is for you.
Hi all, happy to be here. So yeah, I'm going to talk about what happens when we're fine-tuning LLMs on new knowledge. This is a work by Google Research. This is a work by Google Research and the Technion, and it was led by the amazing Zoe Gekman. Yeah, so let's start. So we all know that LLMs are really useful for many tasks, such as coding, creative writing, knowledge extraction, and many other tasks. Let's talk a bit about knowledge extraction. So in this use case, people use LLMs for getting information. So for instance, I can ask, when was the first AI week in TAU held? Or I can educate myself on important breakthroughs in AI. And this is a really important capability of the model to expose knowledge that it learned during pre-training and is stored in its parameters. So how models get this capability and other capabilities? There are three main steps for training language models. The first one is pre-training, where you basically train the model on next word prediction on many types of data sources, such as web documents, code, etc. Then there's the alignment phase, where we're training the model to be helpful. So it starts with supervised fine-tuning, where we're training the model to generate helpful responses conditioned on instructions. And then there is learning from human feedback, where we're fine-tuning the model some more to generate responses that humans prefer. So let's look into fine-tuning. As I said, this is the first step after pre-training. So there usually humans write instructions and responses for different tasks or use cases that people might use LLMs for. So for instance, translation and code understanding, and also knowledge extraction. So what happens for knowledge extraction? So there the model should learn how to expose the knowledge it acquired during pre-training in a helpful way to the user. But then there's also other types of knowledge-seeking instructions that could occur in fine-tuning data sets. So let's look at this example. Who is the keynote speaker for AI Week 2024? And in this case, like assuming the cutoff date of the pre-trained model is, say, last year, the model wouldn't acquire this information during pre-training. So this raises the question, what happens when we do this fine-tuning on new knowledge? So let's talk about two, let's say, probable hypotheses. So the first one is that the model will simply integrate this new knowledge into its parameters, meaning it will just learn this new knowledge and will know how to use it. So then maybe after fine-tuning, the knowledge of the model would be the union of the pre-training knowledge and the new knowledge. But there is also another hypothesis where the model will learn to hallucinate. So it's a bit more complex, so let's unpack it. For this example, let's think on the pre-training data as a knowledge graph where we have entities and relations between them. And when we're fine-tuning the model for knowledge extraction tasks, we're training it to search within this knowledge graph and find the correct answer. But when we're fine-tuning the model on this kind of new knowledge, even though the response may be correct, we're fine-tuning the model to answer things that are outside of this knowledge graph. So in other words, the model might learn to guess or hallucinate. So this is a conjecture that people often make, but there isn't any experimental setup that really shows this. And this leads us to our work when we're trying to answer this question, what happens when we're fine-tuning LLMs on new knowledge in a methodological way. So what we're going to do, we're going to select a fine-tuning data set And then we're going to categorize the examples within this data set according to whether the model knows these examples or not. And then we're going to sample different mixtures from this data set for which we control the ratio of known and unknown examples. And then we're going to measure the effect on accuracy. Basically, like what happens when we increase the rate of unknown examples. And if we see a drop in accuracy, then we know that the model basically hallucinates more. So let's start with the details. First, we're going to have to find some data set that is knowledge seeking, meaning it has a lot of information seeking questions. And we want some questions there to be known to the pre-trained model and some should be unknown. So we take entity questions, which is a closed book QA data set. And it has 12 different relations, such as what work does X do? And these relations are realized using Wikidata for having 80,000 QA pairs, such as what kind of work did Maurice Blondel do? And the answer is a philosopher. Now, for knowledge categorization, as I said, we would like to sample a controlled fine-tuning set for which we know, for instance, that the ratio of known examples is, say, 70%. But this raises the question, how can we even determine for a QA pair, which is essentially a fact, whether the model knows it or not? So for this, we propose a method which we call SLICK. So the objective of this method is that given a pre-trained model M, it should determine if M knows that A answers Q. And we're going to do that by sampling many responses from the model. So we're going to have 10 different few shot prompts, and we're going to have the greedy response and 16 samples with temperature. And according to all of these samples, we're going to decide whether the category of the fact is highly known, maybe known, weakly known, or unknown. And just to give an example for how this works, so let's say we have this question-answer pair from the training set who founded Science of Mind. So we know that the gold answer is Ernest Holmes. And let's look at different cases. So in the first case, we sample these responses, and all of the greedy responses are the gold answer. So in this case, we are certain that the model really knows the answer, so we categorize it as a highly known fact. Then maybe the model only answers sometimes in a greedy way the gold response, and then we categorize it as a maybe known category. And if the model never answers in a greedy fashion, but sometimes answers the gold answer with temperature sampling, we categorize it as weakly known. And if it never outputs the gold answer, we categorize it as unknown. So we find this method to be really useful. For the experiment specifically in this talk, I'm just going to talk about the binary distinction between known and unknown examples. So like all of the first three categories, we're going to treat them as known examples. So now we're going to train models. So we sample these kind of training sets from entity questions for which we control the ratio. So we're going to go like from fully known training sets to fully unknown training sets. And we're going to sample 6,000 examples per data set. And then we trained or we fine-tuned the model per training set. So on the x-axis, you can see the different unknown ratios that we trained, and on y-axis, we can see accuracy. And then we also plot a line for different timestamps during fine-tuning. So for instance, the green line is kind of early in training, and the red line is much later in training, and we have all these lines between them. And we can see several things. So the first thing that we can see is that when we increase the ratio of unknown examples, we indeed see lower performance, meaning like more hallucinations. So this is a concrete evidence for this effect that we wanted to figure out whether it exists or not. So it seems to exist. But we also see another thing, which is that the impact of training on unknown examples is much lower in the beginning of training. Like we can see it's a small drop for the green line, but much larger drop for the red line. And this raises the question, what's happening there? Why do we see this kind of behavior? So for this, we did the following analysis. We're going to look on the training dynamics. So we're going to look at the training accuracy, separating it for known examples and for unknown examples. And we're also going to look on the dev accuracy, and we're going to plot this for the different time steps during training. And what we can see here is that if we look on the plotted line, the dotted line, sorry, which marks when the model reaches highest performance, we can see that only few of the unknown examples are learned or fitted, but almost all of the known examples are already learned. So this is the second takeaway, that we see that models actually struggle to fit new knowledge, but it also explains what happened in the last experiment. So in the beginning of training, like after 10 epochs, when the model reaches its highest performance, it suffers relatively not that much from unknown examples because it didn't learn them so much. But then later in training, this exposure to unknown examples, it does lead to overfitting. And it also makes sense in some way, because like learning to fit the known examples is basically learning to search within the knowledge that the model already has for the answer and responding the answer in the correct format. But training on unknown examples really mean kind of memorization, because the model, it's like this knowledge is random according to the model. Okay, so now let's talk about mitigations. So we saw that training on unknown examples may lead to hallucinations, and we experimented with two ways to prevent it. So the first one is filtering, where we just remove unknown examples from the train set, and the other one is punting, where we basically train the model to answer "I don't know" for each example which is unknown from the training set. And we're going to measure the performance at 2 time steps during training. So we're going to measure it relatively soon in training when performance peaks, and we're going to measure it much later in training because then we know that overfitting is at its highest and the model really suffers from unknown examples. And we're going to compare accuracy in these 2 time steps. And indeed, when we're not doing any mitigation, we see that there is a large drop in accuracy, like we saw in the previous experiments. But when we're doing filtering or punting, this kind of drop in performance or overfitting really diminishes. So we can see that we can just train the model more without suffering from overfitting. Okay, so again, what are the key takeaways from this talk? So the first one is that we see a concrete evidence for having hallucinations when fine-tuning a new knowledge. And the second one is that we see that models struggle to fit or to learn new knowledge. And I'd like to think about it in reverse. So basically, like, we see that LLMs struggle to fit new knowledge, but when they do learn it, the impact is, like, the effect is pretty bad, like they hallucinate more. So this concludes my talk. Thank you. I'd be happy to answer questions. And there are many more experiments and findings in the paper, so I invite you to have a look. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Please stay with us for a Q&A session. Question from the audience. We have one on the back there, please.
Yeah, so...
Yes, please.
Yeah, so the question is, like, there could be many ways to fine-tune a model, like you can do LoRa fine-tuning or you can do other types of fine-tuning. So we're fine-tuning all of the parameters of the model, which is like the standard way to do supervised fine-tuning. I agree that there could be maybe other effects maybe like it preserves the parameters of the model, but then again, you add more parameters and you do other stuff. So it's like an empirical question, and it could be an interesting follow-up work.
Could this be happening to regular models and not just LLMs?
I think LLMs are great because they go through pre-training and then they have all of this knowledge that they acquire during pre-training. So are you referring to models that didn't go through any pre-training? Interesting. Yeah, I guess it's an interesting question. I guess we could see this effect, but yeah, we only measured it for text cases.
Okay, we have another question.
So you talk about hallucination, but one of the known things is that when you fine-tune, you have forgetting. So the question is whether what you see is basically just forgetting.
Yeah, so I didn't talk about it, but we basically see that the model's performance doesn't drop between fine-tuning and it's like when you just prompt the language model, the pre-trained language model. So its ability to answer, like do this closed book QA stuff, it doesn't deteriorate. So I think it's actually like hallucinating. Like there are things that it knows, but it suddenly answers different stuff for them.
Okay, more question. Last question from the audience. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.